Welcome to the Culture Creators Series. My name is Hiam Sakakini, CEO of The Culture Equation. This series is for anybody who cares about workplace culture, catering for fast-growing startups and scale-ups. Today, we're really excited to welcome Lee Hunter. He is the current MD at TikTok Australia, New Zealand. And I will let Lee introduce himself and tell you a little bit more about who he is personally and who he is at work.
So, hi everyone, I'm Lee Hunter. I'm the General Manager for TikTok Australia and New Zealand. I've been a relative veteran at TikTok now for over 2 years. And prior to that, I was at Google for 10 years, doing a bunch of roles around the world, including being the global head of brand for YouTube. I've worked in the UK, I've worked in the US, now back here in Australia. I've spent time as an entrepreneur as well, trying to forge startups here in Australia, and it was an incredible learning experience for me. I'm sorry to say they weren't as successful as I dreamed, but I learned an incredible amount. Spent some time as a CEO for a listed ad tech company here in Australia, where I learned a lot as well. But I feel right now I'm in exactly the place I want to be, where it's bringing together a lot of the things that I find as my interests. I love the creativity of TikTok, and the guitar that you can see here is actually a real, it's not just a prop, it's my background. I used to be a musician for many, many years, and I have an affinity for people who are wanting to express themselves and the background of creativity that they have. So working for TikTok and helping to grow it is a great place for me. And I've been fortunate to be at the initial stages of TikTok in Australia, where I've been able to grow a team and to be able to establish a culture. So I feel very, very fortunate. I feel like I've got the best job in Australia right now.
Wonderful. So tell us a little bit more, if you think about what is it that threads through your career to date that makes you happy at work? What makes you happy in the workplace?
The number one thing that makes me happy is working collaboratively with people. I think coming back to my comment about being a former musician, one of the things that I loved so much about that was being in a band is being in a team, and you're all working towards a shared goal, and you feel like you're in it together. There's an incredible sense of camaraderie. And I think for me, what makes me happy at work is finding a similar sensibility, where you're working with great people that you love to spend time with, and you feel like you're working towards a shared goal. It's a collaborative, open, fun experience. And that's what I try and have in the work environments. That's what I've found to be the best work environments that I've worked in. And it's certainly what I've tried to create at TikTok here in Australia as well, is that sense of everyone enjoying working together and feeling like we're working towards a shared goal together. And also remembering that work can be fun. It doesn't need to be deathly serious. And sometimes, depending on your industry, there might be more serious places than TikTok, but that doesn't mean that work needs to be serious, and you can have fun together. And so I find working with people to be the most enjoyable part of what I do all day, every day. But also specifically to TikTok, I think it's the fact that underpinning it all is how we're driving creativity and expression and culture and all of these wonderful trends that are happening all day, every day. And the way I've tried to work my career is to try and be around that, to try and help guide and shape these places, whether it's at Google or whether it's been at YouTube or now TikTok. I just love being around creative people and the underpinning of creativity and expression that happens on our platform. It's really energizing, keeps things fresh, and it means that we're also moving extremely fast. I tend to get bored easily, so when things move fast, that's where I like to be.
Oh, definitely. I think you can tell us a little bit more later on about how TikTok moves lightning fast. In terms of what drives you, I'm picking up on collaboration. This makes you happy at work. I'm picking up on creativity, fun, working as a team, people with similar sensibilities, as you mentioned. So when you put that all together then, and you think about the word culture, what comes up for you? What's one thing that comes up for you when you think about that word?
Look, culture for me is about enjoying working together. It's about being in an environment where you feel supported, and that you're working towards something in common. And I was lucky enough to be at Google for 10 years. And during that time, when I joined around 2006, Google was the envy of every other business with its culture. And it was a fantastic place to be. And over the 10 years, I saw that change a little bit. And it's not to say that Google's culture is bad by any stretch. It's still fantastic, but I saw it change from being less collaborative and less of those shared goals. And so what that taught me was the power of culture is where you feel free to express yourself. You feel enthused to work together with people. And you also feel like you're doing it all together. You have that shared sensibility, the sort of aspects I was talking about from being in a band and all these good things. I think when culture works well, it's a group of people supporting each other who feel they've got a high degree of trust and support from one another as well. And so that's how I've tried to create things at TikTok, and certainly the best types of culture I've experienced in the past, but it's a constantly evolving thing. And over the 2 years or so that we've had at TikTok, I've been really mindful of how do we maintain culture? How do we keep people feeling like they're having a shared focus and collaborating together, and making sure that all of those little potential nuances of when people have been in a business for a little while and they start to think more individually about what their role is and where they're heading, how do they do that in the right way that still works within and supports the culture that we want to have, but allows individuals to feel like they're progressing as well in their own sense. So it's something you never take your eye off and continually trying to tweak and refine. But I'm really proud of the culture that we've got at TikTok, but it's not going to stop the efforts that we make every day to try and keep it really special.
So there's a real sense of maintenance. You can't set and forget culture. That be correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Particularly in a new business like ours, where you've established teams for the first time and you have a honeymoon period. Everyone is new at the same time. And so everyone kind of collectively comes to those changes in their mindset at the same kind of time as well. And for me, I've found that to typically be around sort of the 1.5 to 2 year mark, where people start to go, what am I doing in the role? Where am I heading? You know, how do I fit? What's going on with other people next to me, and how am I performing? And those kind of thoughts start to come in around the 2 year mark. So we're at a critical point right now where we want to think about how we support the individual, but also maintain the culture in all of that. And yeah, it's been a continuing journey for us, and we're heading in the right direction, but we're not going to take our eye off it.
So there are changes that happen in the individual that then will have an impact on the team. And sometimes you're noticing this is a 1 to 1.5 year mark point in time where that individual sort of might be then less focused on how do I be part of this team, more about where am I going in my career and how am I going to get there. And now you, as the leader of that team, you want to be mindful of both things. You want them to achieve both their personal goals and the team goals. So what are the things that you do intentionally to create space for both from a team level?
Yeah, I mean, and this is the ongoing challenge that I have. I think we need to create a culture of high performance because of the nature of the business that we have. And so with that, you want to be able to reward people transparently who are doing great work, great teams as well that are doing fantastic work. And with that comes the challenge of others looking at where they're at and maybe seeing others moving faster than they are, their roles progressing, their responsibilities growing, and they start to ask questions about where they're at. And so you create these tensions in trying to create a high performance culture where you celebrate great work and great talent, and you can be in danger of having a bit of a disparity. So we really focus on this idea of constant learning and development for everyone. We want to have plans for everyone in how they're developing, how those teams are working together, giving them opportunities to showcase their work, to have a platform for their talents and to make sure everyone has a moment. So whether that's in our weekly meetings and shifting the spotlight around to everyone, whether that's in teams or individuals, or whether that's creating new learning and development opportunities or projects that people can attach themselves to that are outside of their day-to-day job and their established roles and responsibilities, but represent a learning opportunity for them. Those are things that we're trying to do more and more of. And at the same time, create a really tangible and well understood North Star that we're all heading towards, so that we know that every component of the work we do is supporting other pieces and we're all getting there together. And that in a business like ours changes a lot. So the speed of TikTok, just as a case study in that, I think about the last 2 years, every 6 months has been different from the previous 6 months because of the speed of the business. And so that North Star is an evolving thing. So you have to be in constant communication, be really transparent, and ask for feedback and make sure people feel heard and supported and are working together on things. I found that's been a good way to do it and to maintain that balance of how do we focus on the individual and how they're feeling and how they're growing and developing, but how do we keep that collaborative culture that allows the business to move quickly and in the right direction.
Fantastic. So talk to me a little bit about that intentionality around building culture. So you talked about one big thing is your North Star. And although that might, change every 6 months, in general, I know the purpose of TikTok is to
inspire creativity and bring joy.
Right. So at what, does that change every 6 months, or is that pretty solid in terms of the purpose behind TikTok?
The purpose is consistent, but it's the ways in which we get there that we have to be dynamic around. So we might subtly shift our strategy. So as an example, we might be really, really focused on entertainment as a vertical for really supporting creators and growing that content. And then the following 6 months, it might be sport and it might be gaming. And there might be other ways in which we kind of adapt to what our audience is really responding to. And there's some ways in which we can do that. But I think with the speed that we've got, it's meant that intentionality, it's how do we give people all of the transparent information about why we're doing the things. I think context is so important in a lot of this. If you're making decisions in the business, if you're trying to show people where we're heading, I think you've got to really be transparent and you've got to give really strong context. The deeper the understanding that an individual can have about why we're moving in a certain direction, the easier it is for them to grasp how they can fit into it and how they can work together. And I think it's also intentional in the sense that I want our teams to understand the 360 of the business too. So it's not just about their role and their little silo. It's how do they see what's happening over here in other departments and what they're doing and how they can work together. The key, I think, to the culture that we've got is that collaborative spirit. Everything we do tends to involve a lot of different parts of the organization. If you're doing a big end of year celebration of the best content on TikTok, you're going to be involving our content teams and our programming teams and our communication teams and our marketing teams and everyone coming together in all of this. There are very few examples where work becomes siloed. So having our teams understand the breadth of the business is really important. But I really reinforce this idea of transparency and communication and context so that people understand why we're doing the things we're doing. And they have the ability to ask questions in a really open and useful way that doesn't feel like it's being full of artifice and corporate speak, but we're speaking like humans. One of my central tenets in how I want to operate and how I think about our culture is you should be exactly the person you are at home when you come to work as well. You shouldn't have to feel like you're putting on a game face or becoming a different type of person. And so with that, I try and reflect that by being exactly the same person that you might bump into at the pub as you do at work. I want to be fun and have a laugh and be open and transparent and sometimes share my frustrations about things, but also share my enthusiasm about things. And the more I can reflect the type of behaviors we want, I've found it to be useful to give others the freedom to have that type of expression as well. So you become a bit of a lightning rod for the culture that you want to create. You have to exemplify it. And so some of that intentionality, I think, is just reflecting in that transparency, that way in which we make really open forums for people to understand what's happening with context and give feedback and develop their understanding so they feel like they get it.
Beautiful. So open communication, contextualization, transparency, these are incredibly important. How are these baked into your values at TikTok? What are the kinds of values that you all live by, that somehow it's not just based on Lee's personality, it's based on the personality of the business, that this is how we do things?
Yeah. Look, and so at TikTok, it's not dissimilar to how we thought about things at YouTube, at Google. Like there's this idea, we call them bite styles at TikTok, but there's this sense of Googliness when I was at Google, and there are these tenets by which you want to work together and create that culture. And it is around that idea of openness and transparency and being courageous about expressing yourself. And there's sort of a number of things in there. And one of the things that I've tried to work in is, how do you have those macro values of the company, but respecting that each country and each team has to represent the country culture in which they operate as well. And Australians tend to be different to Americans, who tend to be different to the Italians. And so there's that respecting of our national identity within the corporate culture that we want to have as well, and trying to strike that balance. And so I find that Australians want to be more fun. They want to have more work-life balance. They want to have more honest conversations. And if something's not right, they'll tell you. And sometimes, in other countries, that's less of an open nature. So I've tried to find the blend of our national psyche for Australians within that idea of how does the wider values of the company operate. And I think we found a good balance there. I sort of celebrate the Australianness of our team with my international colleagues all the time. I'm really proud of it. And I think we create a culture here that I've heard is a bit envious from some of our other country teams as well, because of the work we've put into it and the way that we're working together and the way that we communicate together.
Fantastic. It's so good to hear. And it's so funny that you say that, because in larger organizations, subcultures can form because you're influenced by either that local culture flavor, or it might be the local culture plus the local leader flavor. And then people from other divisions or other countries do look towards, who's doing things differently, who can we learn from within the organization itself. So it's really nice to see that shine that you're putting out from Australia, which can sometimes seem very far away, right? And very, removed, I think, from the head office or HQ, wherever that might be. Yeah. So you've talked about how you make, culture be something that's quite intentional versus organic. And sometimes organic can be great. Sometimes it can look like an overgrown garden that hasn't been looked after for a very long time, and it can be a bit chaotic. So if you were to give one piece of advice to early stage founders who are thinking about this and they're thinking, is it too early to really start thinking about culture? Maybe I should just let it take its own form first. What's your advice for those folks, given your experience?
Yeah. Well, look, for early stage founders, I think they're in a similar fortunate position that I've been in, that you're hiring. You're bringing people into roles for the first time, sitting in seats that have never been sat in before. And so with that, I've found what's helpful when you create the culture that you want is to be mindful of the type of people that you're going to put in these seats. And for me, that is an enthusiasm that is palpable. You want to start with people that will be culture creators. That enthusiasm, you want to see that and feel that when you're talking with them. That's helpful when you're establishing yourself for the first time. I think as well, for startup founders, TikTok tends to be the best of both worlds in that it's an established business, but it feels like a startup. So I share some of those challenges, and certainly finding people that are comfortable, maybe even excited about ambiguity, is really helpful. There will be constant change. And for certain individuals, constant change is exactly where they don't want to be. And if they feel that tension, if they feel like it's not comfortable for them, that will impact the culture. That negativity or that discomfort will communicate outwards. So hiring and finding people that are comfortable with that ambiguity, I think is key, as well as just being excited by collaboration. When I talk with people and interview them for the first time, what I really want to try and understand is how they work with teams. What are their best experiences working together? How do they like to bring people together? You know, those kind of things I think are really, really helpful. The other piece, as the company grows, if I think about a startup founder and growing teams underneath, just by virtue of bringing people on more and more and teams growing, you run the danger of becoming more distant to actually what people are feeling and what they're talking about and how that culture is adapting. So there's that challenge of how do you stay connected to it? How do you become accessible and easy for people to communicate with? And creating those open lines of communication, because the danger being, if you've insulated yourself and the teams are too big, you just won't know when it's starting to slip. And finding those methods of staying connected and being on the pulse of your culture within your organization, that's a challenge. But I think that accessibility and that ease of communication and being warm and approachable and all of those things, I think that certainly helps. But I definitely rely on my broader team to help me take that pulse check as well. It's something that, as we mentioned, is constantly in flux and constantly changing. So keeping an eye on it is critical.
Great. So you're saying keep those channels open and find a way to have a really, I guess, easy route to getting a pulse anytime you want on the culture versus waiting for the annual engagement survey or what, those are great tools too. But I think from what I'm hearing from you, it's important for you to know at any point in time how things are going on the culture side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, and just on some of that, depending on where people might sit on certain things like an introvert versus an extrovert, some are more comfortable being proactive about wanting to spend time with you and ask you questions and tell you how they're feeling, and some are less comfortable. So I try and do a mix of making sure that people understand that they can set time with me, and I really love to chat with them, and I'm actively asking them for that, but also regularly booking in one-to-ones with the entire team and carving out dedicated moments and spaces for them to say this stuff if they haven't felt comfortable saying it in other forums. So there's definitely the intentional and the organic ways of getting that feedback and getting that pulse check for sure.
Fantastic. What other advice or what other learnings do you know now as a leader that you kind of wish you knew starting out in your when you're first, time managing people, your first time building a team? What are the things that you just wish you knew about culture then that you know now?
I think it would be around when you're starting a business and you're hiring people all together at the same time. It's understanding that there will be similar moments where everyone is having the same kind of thought about, am I in the right role? Am I progressing? Like there's this nature, if you start together, you'll be having those common thoughts together as well, which can be helpful, but it can also be problematic. So I think for me, if we think about the startup founder idea where you're building a business for the first time and you will be hiring teams all together at the first time, it's that idea of how do you create a bit more of a forecasting of when things might be changing. And so one of the things that we've thought about, which I know you're familiar with, Yam, and helped us with, is this idea of the different phases, the storming, norming, performing. Like there's this idea of as teams spend more time together, they will naturally change and start to question those things and find tensions. And so how do you create the spaces, the formats, the methods to overcome those tensions in really healthy ways that ultimately, if things work well, can reinforce a great culture. But if they're not done well, it can really damage a culture. And so understanding those models and those formats and those methodologies of how it might adapt, it has been really key. And if I think about our time with you and the culture equation, it's trying to get to the heart of that. It's trying to understand what are the tenets, what are the methods by which we can adapt together. We can come through these phases that will be natural for every team to come through. It might happen at different times. It might take 1.5 years for one team and it might take 3 to 4 years or however long for another team, but it will happen. So how do you navigate through that in a healthy way? That's something that we found enormously useful to try and navigate through with the culture equation. But it has been something that it wasn't in my mind when we started that this idea of this shifting together of hiring the whole team at the same time would be such a thing. So that's been definitely a learning for me. And I think we're doing a good job, but as I've been saying again and again, like it's just a constant checking. The pulse check is daily.
Now, that is such an important thing that I think it's going to become more and more of a risk for organizations and especially, those that go through the typical VC rounds where they do have a huge influx of cash, maybe from a Series A or Series B round, which then leads to a huge hiring spree, that you do have this bulk of people starting at a similar time. And as you mentioned, then they kind of go through this life cycle of similar thoughts around the same time. So that does mean as a leadership team, you could be looking at a number of exits around about the same time. And when you think about that as a watch out or a massive risk for a CEO or for a founder, like that actually should be front of mind, where you should be looking at your entire talent. When did they start? When are these sorts of things likely to happen? And how can I mitigate a risk of basically a domino effect happening, where you're trying to get ahead of that, but you haven't mapped. You haven't planned, you haven't thought about internal talent and succession. And how do I bring through people? How do I get them ready? What does that bench look like? And that is something that I have seen can be really a downfall of the sort of early stage startup to scale up.
Yeah.
Time frame. And I think you've called out something that hasn't actually been called out on this series yet. It's a really good one. It's a powerful one to start thinking through. And it's only when you've been through multiple rounds of starting different businesses or being the leader of various businesses that are in this time that you realize this is a big one for me to think about. So thank you for that watch out. Another question, last question, is around what do you read or watch or listen to when you're nerding out on this topic around people, around culture, around designing your organization, thinking about things like that?
Yeah, look, I definitely find talking with people is more useful for me. I'm not one to personally pull out books around culture and how it works. It feels a bit distant to me, and I get more out of tangible conversations with other leaders about what they're doing and seeing other examples, and whether that's reading about other businesses or just having conversations with the likes of yourself. Like that's what I find useful. I also get inspiration from, I guess, other sources as well. So I mentioned before about how I used to be in a band, and that's actually been really formative in helping me think about how to bring people together. Like the idea of being in a rehearsal room with your band members and trying to write a song together and getting that shared sense and making sure that you're all playing to the same beat and doing all that good stuff. You have to learn the language of collaboration, and you have to understand how people are feeling and get them all kind of moving together. So I actually get inspired by different places now, whether that's sport or whether that's music, or seeing how different teams might be working together in just a really obtuse field that's not relevant to you. There can be things to be gleaned from that, which I found useful. For me, I think tends to be talking with people and just getting ideas about what we might be doing. That's what I found most useful. If you have conversations with people who are living it, it feels more real than reading books that are looking at it from the outside. So that would be my recommendation.
Brilliant. I love it. Have those real conversations with other founders or other people that have been there, done that, bought the t-shirt.
Yeah.
And I know that you believe in the power of coaching as a leader, and having a coach is something that you've invested in the past, which has been fantastic.
Yeah.
So thank you, Lee. So many words of wisdom that I know many people can learn from. Some of them very, easy. So other things you really have to plan for early. Actually, it's not all super easy. It's not all super kind of, check the box and it's done.
Yeah.
I think the biggest learning here is you cannot set and forget your culture. Just like you can't set and forget the people, because as the people change, the culture changes. So it is an always on activity for somebody in your position. And that's really important to remember.